Fort Bragg's 82nd Airborne Division Barracks was buzzing with activity that Monday morning. Soldiers hustled about, preparing for morning formation, while others scrambled to make their bunks inspection ready. The atmosphere was particularly tense. A new barracks officer had been assigned to their unit, and first impressions were everything in the military. Sergeant Maya Reynolds stood at the entrance, clipboard in hand, her dark brown hair pulled back in a regulation bun so tight it seemed to strain against her scalp. Her uniform was crisp, her boots polished to a mirror shine, but something about her demeanor seemed off to the seasoned soldiers. She checked her watch repeatedly, consulted her clipboard with furrowed brows, and shifted her weight from one foot to another, all subtle tells of nervousness that experienced military personnel could spot a mile away. Which city are you watching from? Share it in the comments. Maybe someone else from your city is here too. And remember, if you believe heroes appear in the most unexpected ways, hit subscribe and give this video a like. "Attention on deck," shouted Staff Sergeant Miller as the company commander, Captain James Harrison, entered the barracks for the morning inspection. The soldiers snapped to attention, but Sergeant Reynolds was a beat late, earning a sideways glance from Captain Harrison. It was a small slip, but in the military, small slips mattered. "At ease?" Captain Harrison said, his voice carrying through the barracks. "Sergeant Reynolds, I believe this is your first day as our new barracks officer?" "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice steady despite her apparent nervousness. "Transferred from Fort Lewis last week, sir." Captain Harrison nodded. "Well, let's see how well you know your protocols. Walk me through this morning's inspection procedure." Sergeant Reynolds hesitated, glancing down at her clipboard. "Yes, sir. First we'll check the cleanliness of common areas, then proceed to individual quarters for bunk inspection and personal area evaluation." Her delivery was halting, almost as if she were reading the protocol for the first time. Several NCOs exchanged glances. This was basic stuff, something every sergeant should know by heart. "And the specific standards for footlocker arrangement?" Captain Harrison pressed, his expression neutral but his eyes evaluating. "Standard regulation, items arranged by size and function," she stammered, clearly struggling to recall details that should have been second nature. Captain Harrison's eyebrow raised slightly. "I see. And what about the new directive regarding electronic storage that came down last month?" Sergeant Reynolds' face went blank. There was no directive. Captain Harrison had made it up to test her, a test she had just failed. "I'll need to review that specific directive, sir," she admitted. The captain nodded slowly. "Very well, carry on with the inspection, Sergeant. I'll observe." As Sergeant Reynolds led the inspection, her discomfort became increasingly apparent. She fumbled through basic protocols, mixed up standard terminology, and seemed completely unfamiliar with the rhythm and flow of barracks life. The soldiers followed her lead, but the skepticism in their eyes was unmistakable. By the time they reached the third floor, whispers were circulating among the ranks. Who was this sergeant who couldn't remember basic protocols? How had she made it to this position? Some speculated she was someone's favorite, promoted beyond her capabilities through connections rather than competence. The inspection concluded, and Captain Harrison pulled Sergeant Reynolds aside. "Sergeant, I'd like to see you in my office at 01 p.m., he said, his tone professional but firm. "Yes, sir," she replied, her expression unreadable. As she walked away, Staff Sergeant Miller approached the captain. "Sir, permission to speak freely?" "Granted. What's the deal with Reynolds? She doesn't seem to know which end of the barracks is up." Captain Harrison watched Sergeant Reynolds' retreating form. "Her file says she's been in for 12 years, with exemplary service records. But something doesn't add up. I'm going to make some calls." What neither of them knew was that Sergeant Maya Reynolds was hiding something that would explain everything about her strange behavior and apparent incompetence. And by the end of the week, that secret would be exposed in the most unexpected way. 3 days later, at 5 a.m., the barracks erupted into chaos. A water pipe had burst on the 4th floor, sending cascades of water down through the building. Soldiers scrambled to save equipment and personal belongings as the water level rose. Sergeant Reynolds arrived on the scene looking disheveled, as if she'd thrown on her uniform in seconds. "Status report," she barked at the first NCO she saw. "Pipe burst in the north wing bathroom." "Sergeant," replied Corporal Jenkins. "Maintenance has been called, but they're 20 minutes out. Water's spreading fast, and we've got sensitive equipment in the comms room directly below." For For the first time since her arrival, Sergeant Reynolds showed no hesitation. "Get me every available towel and blanket. Jenkins, find the main water shutoff for this section. Davis, Martinez, start moving equipment from the comms room to the south wing. Move!" The soldiers stared at her for a moment, surprised by the sudden change in her demeanor. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by commanding confidence. "Now, people," she snapped, and they jumped into action. Reynolds herself headed straight for the source of the flooding, wading through ankle-deep water. When she reached the bathroom, she immediately identified the problem. A major pipe junction had corroded and given way under pressure. Without hesitation, she pulled off her uniform blouse, revealing a black t-shirt underneath. As she reached up to wrap the shirt around the pipe as a temporary measure to redirect the spray, her right sleeve rode up past her elbow. Corporal Jenkins, who had just located the shutoff valve, froze in place. There, on Sergeant Reynolds' inner forearm, was a tattoo, not just any tattoo, but one instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with special operations. It was the distinctive symbol associated with Delta Force, one of the military's most elite and secretive units. Their eyes met, and Reynolds quickly pulled her sleeve down. "The valve, Corporal, now." Jenkins nodded and turned the valve, stopping the water flow. By the time maintenance arrived, Reynolds had organized the soldiers into an efficient cleanup crew, with teams handling water removal, equipment salvage, and damage assessment. Captain Harrison arrived at 6 a.m. to find the situation well under control. He observed Reynolds from a distance, noting how different she seemed, confident, decisive, and clearly experienced in crisis management. "Sir," Staff Sergeant Miller approached him, speaking quietly. "Something weird just happened with Reynolds." "Go on." "Jenkins says he saw a tattoo on her arm. Says it's Delta Force, sir. And the way she's handling this situation, it's like she's a completely different person from the one who couldn't remember basic barracks protocol." Captain Harrison's eyes narrowed as he watched Reynolds directing the cleanup operation with precision and authority. Interesting. Very interesting. Later that afternoon, Captain Harrison sat in his office, a classified file open on his desk. He'd made some calls to contacts at Fort Bragg Special Operations Command, calls that had resulted in this file being sent over by special courier. There was a knock at his door. "Enter," he called. Sergeant Reynolds stepped in and saluted crisply. "Reporting as ordered, sir." "At ease, Sergeant. Or should I say, Major?" Reynolds' expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir." Harrison closed the file. "I think you do. Major Maya Reynolds, Delta Force operative, decorated combat veteran with 3 tours in classified locations, expert in close-quarters combat, infiltration, and, interestingly enough, undercover operations." For a long moment, Reynolds said nothing. Then, almost imperceptibly, her posture changed. She stood straighter, her bearing suddenly reflecting years of command experience. "How did you find out?" she asked, her voice different now, more authoritative, more confident. "The water pipe incident this morning. You forgot to hide who you really are. Plus, I have friends in Special Operations Command who owed me favors." Reynolds nodded slowly. "Then you know I can't discuss the details of my assignment here." "I know enough," Harrison replied. "You're here undercover, evaluating something or someone in this unit, and you deliberately presented yourself as incompetent to avoid drawing attention. A common tactic," she acknowledged. "People ignore those they don't respect. It gives me freedom to move and observe." "What I don't understand," Harrison continued, "is why you're here at all. This is a standard airborne infantry unit, nothing special operations would typically be interested in." Reynolds studied him for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "There's been a series of security breaches across multiple bases, classified information appearing in places it shouldn't. The pattern suggested someone in this unit might be involved, wittingly or unwittingly. And you were sent to find out who." "Yes, my cover was as a newly transferred sergeant with limited experience, someone who wouldn't attract attention or suspicion." Harrison leaned back in his chair. "Well, your cover is compromised now, at least with me and potentially a few others who saw your tattoo this morning." "It's not ideal," Reynolds admitted, "but I can work with it. The question is, Captain, what do you intend to do with this information?" Before Harrison could answer, his office phone rang. He picked it up, listened for a moment, then his expression darkened. "I'll be right there," he said, hanging up. He looked at Reynolds. "We have a situation at the armory. Unauthorized access attempt. Reynolds was already moving toward the door. This could be connected to my investigation. Then let's go, Harrison said, grabbing his sidearm from his desk drawer. They moved quickly across the base to the armory, where they found a security team already surrounding the building. The senior MP approached them. Sir, we have an individual barricaded inside with access to weapons. He's demanding safe passage off base and a vehicle. Who is it? Harrison asked. Specialist Thomas Wilson, sir. Works in communications. Reynolds and Harrison exchanged glances. Communications would have access to classified transmissions, she said quietly. Do we have eyes inside? Harrison asked the MP. Negative, sir, but we have audio. He's alone and sounds increasingly agitated. Reynolds stepped forward. I need to talk to him. With all due respect, Sergeant, this is a hostage negotiator situation, the MP began. I'm not a sergeant, Reynolds cut him off, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone used to giving orders and having them obeyed. And I'm trained for exactly this scenario. The MP looked to Captain Harrison, who nodded. Give her access to communicate with him. Reynolds took the offered radio. Specialist Wilson, this is Major Maya Reynolds, Delta Force. Yes, you heard that correctly. I know what you've been doing, and I know who you've been working with. There was a long pause before Wilson's voice came through, shaky and surprised. I don't know what you're talking about. 3 classified intel packets on Russian troop movements near the Baltic states, 2 sets of deployment schedules for special operations teams in Syria, and most recently, the security protocols for nuclear material transport across domestic military installations, all accessed through your terminal, all transmitted to an encrypted server in Eastern Europe. Another long pause. How did you... Because that's what I do, Wilson. I find people like you. Right now, you have 2 choices. Option 1, you surrender peacefully, cooperate fully, and I personally ensure you get consideration for that cooperation. Option 2, this ends with a tactical team, and I can't promise how that will go for you. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. They said, no one would know, Wilson finally said, his voice barely audible. They said they just wanted to know about troop movements, nothing that would put anyone in danger. They lied, Reynolds replied firmly. The information you provided has already compromised operations and put lives at risk, but you can start making it right now. Another long pause. Then, what? What do I need to do? Put down any weapons, open the armory door with your hands visible, and walk out slowly. 5 tense minutes later, Specialist Wilson emerged from the armory. Hands raised, MPs quickly secured him while Reynolds watched, her expression unreadable. As Wilson was led away, Captain Harrison approached her. So that's what you were really here for. Not just any security breach, a spy. Not exactly a spy, Reynolds corrected, more like a naive kid who got manipulated by foreign intelligence. They approached him online, posed as a think tank researching military deployment patterns, offered him money for what they called publicly available information. By the time he realized what he was really doing, they had enough to blackmail him into continuing. And you've been tracking this the whole time? For 3 months. We needed to identify his contacts and the full extent of the compromise before moving in. Today's armory incident forced our hand. He must have realized we were closing in. The base commander arrived on the scene, and Reynolds was quickly pulled into a high-level briefing. Word spread rapidly through the ranks about what had happened and about who Sergeant Reynolds really was. By evening, the story had transformed completely. Soldiers who had dismissed her as incompetent now spoke in hushed, respectful tones about the Delta Force operator who had been hiding among them. The tattoo sighting became the centerpiece of Barracks gossip, with each retelling making it more dramatic and significant. 2 days later, Reynolds was preparing to leave Fort Bragg, her mission complete. As she packed her few belongings in the barracks, there was a knock at her door. "Enter," she called. Staff Sergeant Miller stepped in, looking somewhat uncomfortable. "So you're really Delta Force, huh?" Reynolds smiled slightly. "I can neither confirm nor deny, Staff Sergeant." Miller nodded, understanding the protocol. "For what it's worth, you had us all fooled. Playing the incompetent newbie, that was some performance. Sometimes the best way to disappear is to be someone others don't take seriously," she replied. "I guess I learned something from all this," Miller said. "Never judge based on first impressions." That's a good lesson in our line of work, Reynolds agreed. Anything else? Miller hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning in everyone's minds. The tattoo, is that really a Delta identifier? Reynolds laughed, the first genuine laugh anyone at the base had heard from her. No, Staff Sergeant, it's the logo of my brother's motorcycle shop in Tennessee. But it served its purpose. It made you all look deeper, ask questions, and ultimately see past the facade I created. Miller's jaw dropped slightly. So even the tattoo was part of your cover? Everything is part of the mission, Miller. Everything. As Reynolds left Fort Bragg later that day, the soldiers who had once dismissed her stood at attention, offering respectful salutes to the woman who had fooled them all. Captain Harrison was the last to say goodbye. You know, Major, you could have just come in officially and conducted your investigation, he said. Reynolds shook her head. Official investigations change behavior, people hide things, cover tracks. I needed to see this unit as it really is, not as it presents itself to authority. And what did you see? Harrison asked. A good unit with good soldiers who need to be a little more careful about who they trust, she replied. And a captain who pays attention to details and asks the right questions. The Army needs more officers like you, Harrison. With that, she climbed into the waiting vehicle and was gone, leaving behind a barracks forever changed by her brief presence. 2 weeks later, Captain Harrison received a small package in his office mail. Inside was a simple challenge coin, one with the authentic Delta Force emblem. There was no note, no explanation needed. It was Reynolds' way of acknowledging their mutual respect and the unspoken bond between those who serve in the shadows and those who command in the light. Harrison placed the coin in his pocket, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving and that sometimes the most extraordinary soldiers are the ones you least suspect.